I assume from this, that let's say a member of this DCA board, they have an educated board, and he got on the mark, and rode downtown, and got out, went upstairs to meet, and his focus business was $5 or whatever it is about the mark. Did he get the $105 too?
Well, sorry, this is what I guess you would have to ask the Department of Community Affairs, but the way it's been explained to me, I think he would. I think he would. And I think he also, not only would he be able to get that, I think he probably also get his MARTA fare. The way I read that sheet, he probably get his MARTA fare as well.
So really that member, John Doe, would get $105 and he gets $5 mark.
That's correct. That's correct. Any more questions? Now, I want to point out one other thing about the mileage. Mary Fred is clearly wrong about signing this in blank, and we proved it two different ways, both with the statement of response and with the difference in the heat on that particular occasion. Now, to be fair, there are a number of occasions where it appears that Ms. Ponce did fill out the mileage, but we have her statement that it was done before Mayor Freddie signed it. But on this particular occasion, it appears he filled it out himself. But in addition to that, in September of 2010, Mayor Freddie paid the mileage, not the per diem, but the mileage back to the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. Now, there's a couple of important points about that. Number one is, why did he pay it back? Well, interestingly enough, and just as a procedural matter, in dealing with the Department of Community Affairs, the way their open records process works is you don't have to send them a letter, you can actually do it online. And that's why we have limited information about who actually made this open records request. But what we do know is in July of 2010, someone named Rachel Moore made an open records request for basically the exact same information that I made an open records request this year, which would be the travel expense sheet for Mayor Freddie. So coincidentally, someone in July of 2010 makes an open records request, and approximately 1 to 2 months later, in September of 2010, all of a sudden Mayor Freddie's discovered a clerical error, quote unquote clerical error, and he is now paying the mileage back to the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. Here is the primary question that I would pose to this committee. Mayor Freddie was going to Atlanta for the express purpose of a meeting of the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. In fact, you can look, when you compare the August 2009 expense sheets, the sole purpose for this trip listed on the City of Valdosta travel expense sheet is DCA board meeting. It's not DCA board meeting and meeting with state legislators. It's not DCA board meeting and meeting with a potential industry that wants to move to Valdosta. It's DCA board meeting, and that's it. So my question that I will pose rhetorically to this committee is, if Mayor Freddie was going to pay the mileage back, why didn't he pay the City of Valdosta back? This was a DCA board meeting. This is a state board. The mayor was appointed by the governor to a state board which has its own funding, which has its own travel expense reimbursement policy, and that was clearly the only reason he was going to Atlanta. Why is the City of Valdosta footing the bill for the mileage? Why was not the City of Valdosta repaid? And that is one of the key points I want to make today. And finally, members of the committee, I would like to go over the specific parts of the Code of Ethics that my client and I believe has been violated. The first one is Section 3B4, which prohibits a city official from using his or her official position to attempt to secure privileges that are not available to the general public. And I'm going to be very brief on this point, and just to ask the question, I don't know anybody in the general public that can drive to Atlanta on business and be reimbursed for the same expense twice. That is not a privilege that is available to the general public. Therefore, my client, I believe that provision of the ethics code has been violated.
I said privilege.
Sir?
How is it a privilege?
Well, Mr. Talbot, it's a privilege because he got paid twice. He got paid twice. Now, he paid some of it back, but on the per diem, which is specifically for hotel and meal, which has never been paid back to either body, he got his actual expenses reimbursed by the city, plus $105, which was supposed to go to that same expense. Now, I don't know anybody in the general public that has that perk, and if it's not a privilege, I'm not sure what it is, other than an ethics code violation. The second, any more questions on that? Now, the second violation is Section 3B6. Engage in any activity or transaction that is prohibited by law now existing or hereafter enacted, which is applicable to him, her, by virtue of being a member of the governing authority. Members of the committee, I'd like to point to two different code sections that come out of Official Code of Georgia Annotated, Title 16, Chapter 10, Section 6, Section 8. Now this is the part of the Georgia Code, Georgia Criminal Code, which specifically applies to public officials. Now this is not a general statute theft or anything like that. This part of the Georgia Code, and I'm going to highlight two sections, applies specifically to public officials, and it applies not only to state officials, but also to an officer and employee of any political subdivision thereof which the city of Valdosta will qualify as. The first code section, 16-10-8, prohibits any officer or employee of the state or any political subdivision from making or giving a certificate or other writing that this particular individual knowingly makes and delivers containing a statement which he knows to be false. Members of the committee, when Mayor Freddie submitted to the city of Valdosta an expense sheet which said, please reimburse me for my mileage, which he did on 9 separate times. When we know from the statement of his clients and from the difference in the ink on that particular expense reimbursement sheet to the DCA, we know for a fact he knew he was getting mileage on 9 separate occasions for Department of Community Affairs. When he submitted an expense sheet to the city of Valdosta for funds to apply for funds from the public treasury to reimburse him for the mileage the second time, I would respectfully submit to this committee that that was a false statement which would violate that particular code section.
Mr. Smith,
Yes, sir.
you say he submitted 9 times duplicate mileage from the city and DCA.
Yes, sir.
Out of those 9 times, because you just showed one example, out of the 9 times, how many times can you say that the mayor himself put the mileage in?
I think we can show 2 out of the 9 where the ink is different. And to be fair, if you look at the ink, and here again going from the ink because we have color copies, it does look like that Ms. Ponce did fill out the mileage a number of times. But I think what is particularly critical is to look at Ms. Ponce's statement where she states she filled it out, and this is not just Mayor Freddie, this is everyone who's a board member. She fills it out and then submits it to the board member. So the board member signs it after he or she sees what's in it. And once they sign it, they certify it's true.
Okay,